Yesterday, the Miles Franklin Prize announced their long list of 12 books. So I'm going to go through them. I'm going to read the description for you. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the long list after we've discussed what the books are. So let's not stuff around. Let's get straight into it. Only Sound Remains by Hossein Ashgari. Sadid had not returned home to Iran after publishing his novel, The Imaginary Narratives of a Real Murderer, for fear of political prosecution. He is surprised when Ismail, his father, who has never left Iran, announces that he is travelling to Adelaide to visit him. During his short stay, Ismail tells Saeed the story of his unrequited love for Farrukh Farrokhzad, the most controversial poet of modern Iran. The story makes Saeed see his father in a new light, and leaves him with the burning question: had his father played an unwitting role in the death of Farrukh? I've never heard of this book or this author before though, but this does sound like it has some good potential to it. Some interesting topics to discuss. Wall by Jen Craig. Every new novel by Jen Craig is a cause for celebration. They are a reminder that literature is still being written in the English language. In Wall, her brilliant third novel, Jen Craig deepens her proliferative style and self-examination as her narrative tries to contend with that most heart-wrenching of how to dispose of your parents' belongings after they die. A woman returns to Australia to clear out her father's house, with an eye to transforming the contents into an art installation in the tradition of a revered Chinese artist, Song Dong. What she hasn't reckoned with is the tangle of jealousies, resentments, and familial complications that she had thought in leaving the country she had put behind her, a tangle that ensnared her before she arrives. This is another novel I was completely unaware of, another author I was completely unaware of. Grief is a topic I'm very interested in. This has the potential to be a very good book, I guess. It's exactly what I like. And it's quite short as well, which means that it's a good one to take a chance on with an author that I'm unfamiliar with. Strangers at a Port by Lauren Amy Curtis. Julia is 10. She lives on the greenest island in a volcanic archipelago. She has never left. Her best friend beside her older sister, Giovanna, is a donkey. She ties ribbons around his head and thinks she will marry him when the time comes. The sisters' days on the island are shaped by ritual, community, superstition and isolation, until the man arrives, and a foreign yacht anchors at the port, and the vines begin to fail, and everything changes. This is the third book in a row I'm going to say this for. I've never heard of this author before. I've never heard of this book before. An outsider coming into an isolated community is always an interesting plot point. I guess like a lot of these books, you can make the plot and the premise sound very interesting, but it all comes down to how the author executes that. But this is another one that has potential to be really good. Anam by Andre Dow. A grandson tries to learn the family story, but what kind of story is it? Is it a prison memoir about a grandfather held without charge, or a trial by revolutionary government? Is it an oral history of the grandmother left behind to look after the children, a love story, or a ghost story, a mystery to be solved? Moving from 1930s Hanoi through a series of never-ending wars and displacement to Saigon, Paris, Melbourne, and Cambridge, Anam is a novel about memory and inheritance, colonialism and belonging, home and exile. Anam blends fiction and essay, theory and everyday life to imagine that has been repressed, left out and forgotten. The grandson mines his family and personal stories to turn over ideas that resonate with all of us around places and home, legacy and expectation, ambition and sacrifice. As he shifts through letters, photographs, government documents and memories, he has his own family to think about, a partner and an infant daughter. Is there a way to remember the past that creates a future for them, or does coming home always involve a certain amount of forgetting? Now that sounds excellent, I have to say. Again, another author I'm completely unfamiliar with. It's a little bit like, do I even read Aussie books? I do read Aussie books. But one of the things about book prizes is they do give you a chance to discover people that you have missed or that you'd never heard of before. But that one is definitely getting read. The Belle of the World, Gregory Day. When a troubled Sarah Hutchins returns to Australia from boarding school in England and time spent in Europe, she is sent to live with her eccentric Uncle Fernie on his family property, Nangahook. With the sound of the ocean surrounding everything they do on the farm, Sarah and her uncle form an inspired bond, hosting visiting field naturalists and holding soirees in which Sarah performs on a piano whose sound she has altered with items and objects from the bush and shores. As Sarah's world is nourished by music and poetry, Fernie's life is marketed by Such Is Life, a book he has read and reread, so much so that the volume is falling apart. Its saviour is Jones, the bookbinder in Moolap, who performs a miraculous act. To shock and surprise, Jones interleaves Fern's volumes with a book he brought from An American Soldier, a once obscure tale of whale and the sea. In art, as is in life, nature seems supreme. Nangahook is threatened, however, when members of the communities ask the Hutchins to help make a savage landscape sacred by financing the installation of a town bell. The fearless musician and her idealistic auntie refuse to buckle to local pressures, mounting their own defence of the belle of the world. Gregory Day's new novels embodies a cultural reckoning in a breathtakingly beautiful and lyrical way. The belle of the world is both a song to the natural wonders that are not yet gone and a luminous prehistory of contemporary climate change and its connection to colonialism. It is a book immersed in the early to mid 20th century, but written very much from the heart of the future. Look, Gregory Day has built a name for himself in Australian literature, but I have never read one of his books, and this book is unfortunately not one that is calling to me. Such As Life is a reference to the Australian bushranger Ned Cully. To sort of intertwine a book about Ned Cully with a book about an American soldier, and it just does not sound like my thing. It just sounds a bit wanky to me. Edenglassy by Melissa Lukashenko. Two extraordinary Indigenous stories set 5 generations apart. When Millian meets the beautiful Nita in Edenglassy, their saltwater people still outnumber the British. As colonial unrest peaks, Millian dreams of taking his bride home to Yimbinbah country, but his plans for independence collide with white justice. 2 centuries later, fiery activist Winona meets Dr. Johnny. Together they care for obstinate centenarian Granny Edie, and sparks fly, but not always in the right direction. What nobody knows is how far the legacy of the past will reach into their modern lives. In this brilliant epic novel, Melissa Lukashenko tortures Queensland's colonial myth while reimagining an Australian future. I think this is probably the least surprising book on the long list. There's one more still to come that's of the same sort of level of not surprising, but I think we were all expecting to see Melissa Lukashenko on the long list. We definitely knew she'd be part of the conversation, that's for sure. Every time I read about this book, the more likely I think I am to pick it up. This is getting some very good reviews, and it sounds like Melissa Lukashenko's best work to date, which is pretty impressive because her last book, Too Much Lip, won this prize, so I guess that might make her an early favourite. The Sitter by Angela O'Keeffe. Paris 2020. A writer is confined to a hotel room during the early days of the pandemic, struggling to finish a novel about Hortense Cézanne, wife and sometimes muse of the famous painter. Dead for more than a century, Hortense has been reawakened by his creative endeavours, and now shadows the writer through the locked-down city. But Hortense, always subject to the gaze of others, is increasingly intrigued by the women before her. Who is she, and what events hide her in the past? Heartbreaking and perfectly formed, The Sitter explores the tension between artist and subject, between the story told about us and the stories we choose to tell. Angela O'Keeffe is another author that I have never heard of before. The Sitter is a book that I've obviously not heard of before. Even at the rather short length of this book, that question that it's exploring seems a little bit trite without something else to drive the plot. Hospital by Sanya Rushdie. translated by Aravana Singer. A strong and courageous novel that deftly tackles psychosis. In Melbourne, Australia, a woman in her late 30s is diagnosed with her third episode of psychosis, amounting to schizophrenia. What follows is a frenzied journey from home to a community house to a hospital and out again. Sanya, the protagonist, same name as the author I just noticed, finds herself questioning the diagnosis of her sanity or insanity, as determined and defined by the medical model which seems less than convincing to her. Having studied psychology herself, she wonders whether, even if the diagnosis is correct to some extent, the treatment would be different. Sanya tells her story in a deceptively calm first-person voice, using conversations as the primary narrative voice, as she ponders if and when the next psychotic episode will materialize. Based on real-life events and originally written in Bengali, Hospital is a daring first novel that unflinchingly depicts the precarity of a woman living with psychosis and her struggles with the definition of sanity in our society. This was on the Stella Prize long list, and now it has sort of done the double of the two big prizes in Australia. And it's one that I very much want to get to and read, but I haven't got around to yet. I think this one just sounds like an amazing novel, and I hope it does really well. Charlotte Wood's Stoneyard Devotional, a deeply moving novel about forgiveness, grief, and what it means to be good, from award-winning author of The Natural Way of Things and The Weekend. A woman abandons her city life and manages to return to the place of her childhood, holding up in a small religious community hidden away on the stark plains of the Monaro. She does not believe in God. She does not know what prayer is. And she finds herself living in this strange, reclusive life almost by accident. As if she gradually adjusts to the rhythm of monastic life, she finds herself turning again and again to thought of her mother, whose early death she can't forget. Disquiet interrupts this secluded life with 3 visitations. First comes a terrible mouse plague, each day signalling a new battle against the rising infestation. Second is the return of the skeletal remains of a sister who left the community decades before to minister to deprived women in Thailand, and then disappeared, presumed murdered. Finally, a troubled visitor to the monastery pulls the narrator further back into her past. With each of these disturbing arrivals, the women face some deep questions. Can a person be truly good? What is forgiveness? Is loss of hope a moral failing? And can the business of grief ever really be finished? A meditative and deeply moving novel from one of Australia's most acclaimed and best loved writers. Wood joins the ranks of writers such as Nora Ephron, Penelope Lively, and Elizabeth Strout. I have to say, I think she's a little bit more talented than Elizabeth Strout, but that's not saying a lot. One that I read beforehand, and I know a lot of you, when I did my predictions video, said, what about Stoneyard Devotional? And I did think that was a good shout when you all said it. I thought that was definitely a book that would be part of the conversation, although I thought it was a little bit on the average side to make this cut. I didn't think it was a bad book. I thought it was a good book. I thought it was an average to good book rather than a good to amazing book, which is what we want on our long lists. Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. An epic set in the north of Australia, told with the richness of language and scale of imagery for which Alexis Wright has become renowned, in a small town dominated by a haze cloud which heralds both an ecological catastrophe and a gathering of the ancestors. A crazed visionary seeks out donkeys as the solution to the global climate crisis and economic dependency of the Aboriginal people. His wife seeks solace from his madness in following the dance of butterflies and scouring the internet to find out how she can seek repatriation for her Aboriginal Chinese family to China. One of their sons, called Aboriginal Sovereignty, is determined to commit suicide. The other, Tommy Hawk, wishes his brother dead so that he can pursue his dream of becoming white and powerful. This is a novel which pushes allegory and landscape to its limits, a cry of outrage against oppression and disadvantage, and a fable for the end of days. Alexis Wright is a very well-known and renowned Australian writer who is extremely talented and, one of the best Australian writers out there. She's also an author who I think a lot of people will find quite divisive. Her style is not for everybody, and her style is not for me. I think if you really like the minutiae of writing, the sentences that take your breath away, if you consider yourself more of a word nerd than a book nerd, then Alexis Wright is probably catnip to you. I find all of that gets in the way of what I enjoy in a book, and I don't feel like it adds to her stories, but this is getting a lot of praise, and it has won the Stella Prize and the James Tate Prize and the University of Queensland Fictional Book Award, apparently, as well as, and I think this is quite prestigious, shortlisted for the Dublin Literary Award, which that is a little bit impressive. This is, one that you might expect to see on the Booker Prize as well. It's a very strong book, and it's a very long book. So I got two of my predictions right, Hospital and Edenglassy, but while I didn't predict Praiseworthy, I did mention it, and I don't think anybody is shocked to see Praiseworthy. I think Praiseworthy and Edenglassy are the two big names on this long list, and without having read these books, they're probably the favourites at this stage to win the prize, I think. I quite like the diversity on this long list. I feel like there is a lot of different types of Aussie experiences on this long list. Every book is saying something different, and I feel like if you read literary fiction, you look at this long list and there's almost certainly a book for you, and there's almost certainly a book you're not interested in at all. I think that's a really good long list, to be honest, that gives something to every reader. It's not trying to give you the ideal long list, but trying to give you a book that you've not heard of. So I do congratulate the judges for picking a long list that I think is very well catered to a lot of people. There is something that really disappointed me about this, and I'm going to have a little bit of a rant, and it's nothing to do with the judges or the books or the prize itself, but this is our best dozen books of the last 12 months, and the difficulties of getting some of these books really needs to be explained to me by the publishers. There needs to be a concerted effort from publishers to connect with bookstores, with distributors, and with libraries to get their books out there. And they need to really prioritize ebooks and audiobooks as well. There is no point being an indie publisher and catching the attention of an award like this if you don't know how to market a product. Indie publishers are absolutely wonderful, but there is a minimum level of exposure they need to generate themselves. There is a minimum level of distribution and promotion that they need to do themselves. There are books on this list that were not even available on Kobo as an ebook at the time the long list was announced. I mean, audiobooks at the moment should be mandatory for anybody publishing books, but to not have an ebook until this morning, that is absolute amateur stuff. The most common comment I get on this channel is, where are all the good Aussie books by good Aussie authors? And the answer to that is that they've signed for publishers that still think e-readers are a novelty. If I were to give advice to an aspiring young Aussie author, it would be to find a US or UK based publisher, because the bookish world is changing, and it's changing fast, and Aussie publishers are yet to embrace the newest technologies from 10 years ago. And as the bookish world is becoming increasingly international, Aussie publishers are still playing catch up, and Aussie books are going to be left further and further behind unless we get some publishers that are willing to do the hard yards, to be competent at their job. I mean, if you're a publishing house, what is your job other than to market books? And I think that this prize just points out that too many Aussie publishers either lack the financial resources to do that, or lack the expertise in marketing books. And why are you in publishing if you can't do those things? I'm just really frustrated by our publishing industry sabotaging our authors. Can we get better publishers, please? I hope if you are watching this and you're an international viewer, I hope the books that sound good to you are available in some way to you, because other than Alexis Wright and Melissa Lukashenko, I think you're probably going to have a bit of trouble. But please look them up. Please prove me wrong. I would love to be wrong about that. I would love to thank my Patreons for their support. We read 2 books a month, one translated and one not. If you would like to read books with me and have a chat about it with me and some wonderful Patrons on a video call at the end of the book, then why not sign up to my Patreon and read some excellent books. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.